Part 1, Diana Dors. Britain entered the 1970s with a sense that the old rules had finally collapsed. Diana Dors was no longer the fresh discovery of the cinema, yet she never disappeared from public attention. As leading roles became scarce, her private life grew louder, filling the space once occupied by cameras and premieres. The label of the British Marilyn Monroe followed her everywhere. Blonde hair, fearless charm, and an image built on allure had once secured her place in popular culture. Behind that image lived a woman deeply troubled by the passing of youth and the threat of being forgotten. Diana refused to fade quietly. She chose excess as resistance, turning her life into a performance that could not be ignored. Her estate near Ascot became a magnet for chaos. Nights there blurred into one another, crowded with powerful men, entertainers, social climbers, and figures who thrived on secrecy. The gatherings were less about celebration and more about control. Diana presided over them with confidence, ensuring that attention never drifted too far from her presence. Men moved through her life with striking speed. They were rarely anchors. They functioned as temporary shields against abandonment, chosen to occupy silence rather than build permanence. Each new attachment promised reassurance, yet none were meant to last. The cycle repeated because the fear beneath it never softened. Her marriage to Alan Lake embodied that tension. Their relationship burned intensely, shaped by an agreement that allowed freedom in theory but created dependency in reality. Passion and volatility fed one another. The arrangement was meant to preserve desire, yet it exposed emotional fragility on both sides. Freedom existed, but safety did not. Intimacy became both authority and refuge. Diana understood how to command a room, how to make others orbit her needs. At the same time, those encounters functioned as fragile lifelines, offering brief relief from isolation. What looked like power often masked desperation. During this period she published memoirs that shocked the public. Names were revealed, private habits exposed, and reputations unsettled. These books were not simply confessions. They were acts of defiance. By telling her own story without restraint, Diana reclaimed control over a narrative that tabloids had long exploited. Psychologically, the pattern remained consistent. The more unrestricted her lifestyle appeared, the clearer her vulnerability became. Liberty in private life did not translate into inner peace. Instead, it intensified the contrast between public confidence and private emptiness. Diana Dors in the 1970s stood as a symbol of contradiction. She embodied liberation while fearing silence. She commanded desire while dreading irrelevance. Her constant reinvention was less about pleasure and more about survival in a world that quickly discards yesterday's icons. Do you see Diana Dors as a woman chasing freedom, or someone running from the quiet she could not face? In the next part, another British icon emerges, revealing a colder and more calculated way of changing men. Part 2, Joan Collins. Before Joan Collins became a defining television icon of the 1980s, her reputation had already been forged in the unforgiving social furnace of the previous decade. This was not the story of a woman swept along by liberation. It was the story of a woman who understood desire as leverage and intimacy as strategy. By the time the 1970s began, Joan had already survived 2 collapsed marriages. These were not romantic failures that left her diminished. They functioned as early lessons. She learned quickly that permanence was optional and that emotional detachment could be a form of power. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Joan did not fear starting over. She treated endings as recalibrations. Her marriage to Ron Cass sat at the center of a widening storm. On the surface, it appeared stable, even respectable. Beneath it existed a constant current of rumors, private arrangements, and carefully managed indiscretions. The relationship did not restrain her. It provided cover. Joan operated comfortably within contradiction, maintaining public legitimacy while privately exercising freedom. Her approach to men was unapologetically selective. She did not wait to be noticed. She identified targets, assessed their usefulness, and decided whether they were worth her time. Attraction alone was insufficient. Status mattered. Access mattered. Influence mattered. Romance, in Joan's world, was never separated from hierarchy. Men became extensions of lifestyle. Some offered wealth. Others provided entry into exclusive circles. A few delivered excitement or validation. When their value expired, so did their presence. There was no apology, because there was no illusion of permanence to begin with. What unsettled observers was not the frequency of change, but the absence of visible remorse. As she aged, the narrative surrounding her shifted. The media struggled with the image of a woman who grew older without surrendering control. She was portrayed as dangerous, excessive, and intimidating. Yet fascination never faded. Joan embodied a version of female autonomy that contradicted cultural comfort. She was neither apologetic nor softened by expectation. Her relationships were not fueled by emotional hunger. They ended because of boredom. When stimulation declined or ambition stalled, she moved on. This distinction defined her. Unlike others who sought reassurance through constant attachment, Joan sought engagement. Once it disappeared, so did the men. At the core of her persona existed emotional discipline. Joan did not confuse attachment with dependency. She guarded vulnerability with precision, revealing only what served her. This control allowed her to navigate scandal without collapse. Public criticism never dismantled her identity because it had been built internally, not granted externally. The Joan Collins of the 1970s was a rehearsal for the figure the world would later recognize on screen. Commanding. Calculated. Untouchable. Her private life mirrored her future roles, not because she imitated fiction, but because fiction eventually caught up with her reality. Was Joan Collins a product of liberation, or its most skilled architect? In the next part, a very different woman appears, one whose rebellion against love would collide with tragedy in ways no strategy could prevent. Part 3, Sarah Miles. Sarah Miles was born into privilege, surrounded by structure, expectation, and class certainty. She rejected all of it. From an early age, she treated social rules as decorations meant to be knocked aside. Wealth and pedigree did not impress her. Conformity repelled her. What she wanted was movement, sensation, and emotional intensity without boundaries. Her marriage to the celebrated writer Robert Bolt reflected that philosophy from the start. It was never designed as a closed system. Fidelity, as commonly understood, held little value for Sarah. She believed one man could never contain the full range of her curiosity or appetite for life. Love, in her view, was expansive or it was dishonest. She carried that belief into her domestic world. Lovers were not hidden or compartmentalized. They were invited into her orbit, sometimes into the same spaces she shared with her husband. This was not secrecy. It was declaration. A deliberate challenge to a society that still clung to monogamy as moral proof. Sarah did not seek permission. She lived as if none was required. Her life became nomadic. Film sets blurred into hotel rooms. Parties replaced routines. Relationships shifted with location and mood. Men entered and exited her life with the same fluidity as roles. Each connection represented a different version of herself, briefly explored and then released. Stability was never the goal. Experience was. That freedom collided with catastrophe in Arizona. During a film production, her business manager, a man described as deeply fixated on her, was found dead in her motel room. The incident ignited an international media storm. Context vanished. Speculation replaced facts. Sarah was recast overnight from eccentric rebel to dangerous seductress. The press constructed a narrative of fatal attraction. Headlines reduced complexity to menace. Her independence was reframed as threat. Her refusal to conform became evidence of guilt in the court of public opinion. Yet Sarah did not retreat. She did not soften her image or beg for understanding. She met scrutiny with the same defiance that had shaped her entire life. Investigations passed. Accusations dissolved. The noise faded. Sarah remained unchanged. She continued living according to her own internal logic, unmoved by shame campaigns or moral panic. Eventually, her marriage to Robert Bolt collapsed under accumulated strain. Years later, in an unexpected turn, she returned to him and remarried after his health declined. The circle closed without apology. This return was not surrender. It was choice. Sarah moved through love the way she moved through art. Openly. Repeatedly. Without reverence for permanence. She did not treat relationships as shelter from the world. She treated them as encounters within it. Sarah Miles never searched for safety in love. She searched for truth in motion. That refusal to settle made her both magnetic and controversial. In a decade obsessed with freedom, she lived it without compromise, even when the cost was unbearable. Was Sarah Miles fearless, or simply unwilling to stop even when the danger became clear? In the next part, desire takes a different form, shaped not by rebellion, but by dependence and the fear of standing alone. Part 4, Britt Ekland. Britt Ekland arrived in Britain as a fantasy imported from the north. Tall, blonde, effortlessly glamorous, she quickly evolved from a Scandinavian screen presence into the preferred companion of powerful British men. Her fame did not rest only on roles. It was amplified by who stood beside her. In the 1970s, Britt was less defined by what she did than by who she was seen with. For her, men functioned as social identity. Each relationship confirmed her relevance, her desirability, her place within elite circles. Being alone felt like erasure. Partnership was not simply romantic. It was existential. Without a man, Britt struggled to recognize herself. She possessed an extraordinary ability to adapt. With each new partner, she reshaped her habits, her style, even her temperament. She mirrored their world until it became her own. This flexibility appeared charming from the outside, but it carried a cost. Every transformation required the quiet abandonment of a former self. Her marriage to Peter Sellers became the most formative lesson. Brilliant, volatile, and emotionally unstable, Sellers pulled Britt into a landscape of extremes. Love and chaos became inseparable. The relationship taught her that devotion could mean surrender and that intensity often masked instability. She learned how easily affection could turn unpredictable, yet she remained drawn to that edge. The pattern intensified with Rod Stewart. Their relationship unfolded publicly, saturated with glamour, excess, and constant attention. Britt did not merely support him. She submerged herself in his life. She organized schedules, shaped appearances, and placed her own ambitions on pause. Her identity dissolved into his orbit. In return, she expected permanence. What followed was abrupt abandonment. When the relationship ended, it did so without ceremony. Britt was left displaced, emotionally and physically, confronted with the emptiness she had worked so hard to avoid. The rejection was not only personal. It dismantled the version of herself she had built around him. She recovered quickly on the surface. New relationships followed in rapid succession. Each man offered temporary grounding, a brief illusion of stability. The cycle repeated because the underlying fear remained untouched. Alone, Britt felt unseen. Invisible. Connection became necessity rather than choice. Later in life, she admitted the truth without glamour. Solitude frightened her. Silence felt hostile. Being without a partner stripped away her sense of worth. What the public interpreted as opportunism was, in reality, avoidance. Avoidance of an inner void she never learned to sit with. Her dependence was carefully disguised by beauty and fame. The spotlight softened the perception of vulnerability. Photographs suggested confidence. Headlines suggested control. Internally, Britt drifted from one attachment to another, searching for security and reflection rather than self-recognition. Britt Ekland in the 1970s embodied a quieter contradiction. She appeared adored yet felt unseen. She was desired yet deeply unsure of her own shape without someone else defining it. Her story was not about excess, but about fear. Fear of absence. Fear of stillness. Fear of facing herself without applause. Do you think Britt Ekland was using men to stay famous, or using fame to avoid being alone? In the next part, a smiling national favorite reveals a far darker and more dangerous attraction beneath the surface. Part 5, Barbara Windsor. To the public, Barbara Windsor appeared harmless. A bright laugh, a playful voice, a figure associated with cheeky humor and light entertainment. She was presented as approachable and safe, a familiar face designed to comfort audiences. That image concealed a private world shaped by risk, intensity, and attraction to danger. Barbara was drawn to men who carried authority through fear rather than stability. Protection mattered to her, but not the gentle kind. She gravitated toward figures who projected control, unpredictability, and power. This preference placed her close to environments most people avoided. What others perceived as reckless choice felt to Barbara like security through dominance. Her secret relationship with Sid James exposed this dynamic. On set, he held influence. Off set, he became a commanding presence in her emotional life. He was older, married, and intensely devoted. His attention offered reassurance, yet it also demanded loyalty. Barbara accepted his protection while resisting full surrender. The imbalance created dependence without commitment. Her withdrawal from Sid was abrupt and emotionally careless, though not deliberately cruel. When the intensity overwhelmed her, she retreated without negotiation. The shift left him destabilized, clinging to promises she never intended to keep. Barbara did not manage emotional fallout. She escaped it. Survival took priority over responsibility. The most defining relationship of the decade unfolded with Ronnie Knight. Their marriage placed her directly inside the criminal underworld. Courtrooms, police inquiries, and surveillance became part of daily life, existing alongside television appearances and public admiration. She navigated both worlds simultaneously, performing innocence on screen while absorbing pressure behind closed doors. This double existence sharpened her instincts. Barbara learned how to switch roles quickly. She understood when to charm, when to deflect, and when to remain silent. The constant presence of law enforcement and press attention hardened her. The smile remained, but it functioned as armor rather than expression. Love, for Barbara, was evaluated by stimulation. Calm felt unsafe. Stability felt dull. She chose partners who heightened her senses, even if they threatened her well-being. Each relationship provided adrenaline, distraction, and a temporary sense of control. When the excitement faded, so did attachment. Public narratives framed her as naive, but that perception missed the core truth. Barbara was not unaware. She was adaptive. Her decisions were driven by instinctive self-preservation rather than fantasy. She understood the risks and accepted them as the price of feeling alive. Behind the laughter lived a calculating awareness. She read people quickly and responded faster. Emotional softness existed, but it was carefully rationed. Trust was provisional. Attachment was conditional. These traits allowed her to survive environments that would have consumed someone less alert. Barbara Windsor's life in the 1970s revealed a sharp contrast between appearance and reality. The nation embraced a cheerful entertainer, while a tougher figure navigated volatility, power struggles, and constant threat. Her charm was real, but it was also a tool, refined to keep her standing in spaces where vulnerability invited collapse. Was Barbara Windsor truly innocent, or did she understand danger better than anyone watching her smile? In the next part, desire sheds its warmth entirely, as a colder and more enigmatic figure redefines intimacy without apology. Part 6, Charlotte Rampling. Charlotte Rampling entered the 1970s with a presence that felt distant and controlled. Her beauty was cool rather than inviting, her gaze unreadable. She rejected inherited morality without drama, treating traditional expectations as irrelevant noise. Where others sought approval, Charlotte maintained separation. She did not view men as owners or destinations. They were companions in exploration, witnesses to inner terrain rather than anchors. Intimacy, for her, was an exchange of awareness, not a promise of permanence. This outlook unsettled observers because it removed emotion from familiar scripts and replaced it with intention. That intention became visible through a living arrangement that shocked Britain. Charlotte shared her home with her husband and another partner, openly and without apology. The structure was neither hidden nor framed as rebellion. It was presented as practical truth. She met public outrage with composure, refusing to justify what she did not consider wrong. Her calm was the source of her power. While critics searched for jealousy or collapse, they found none. She rejected possessiveness as weakness and believed control began where insecurity ended. By refusing rivalry, she inverted expectation. Attention could not destabilize her because it did not define her. As scrutiny intensified, Charlotte chose distance over compromise. She left England and relocated to France, severing ties with a culture that insisted on interpretation. The move was not escape. It was alignment. In France, ambiguity felt permitted, even respected. The relocation marked a deliberate reset. There, she entered a relationship with composer Jean-Michel Jarre. The connection symbolized reinvention rather than rescue. Charlotte did not soften or simplify herself to fit the bond. She recalibrated. The relationship became a platform for transformation, not containment. Identity remained fluid, self-authored. Her film choices mirrored this internal logic. Roles leaned toward psychological complexity and moral ambiguity. Characters reflected the same distance and depth that defined her off-screen. Art and life fed each other, each sharpening the other's edges. Performance became extension rather than disguise. Critics often misunderstood her restraint as coldness. In reality, Charlotte absorbed emotion rather than displayed it. She processed others' intensity and used it as material for growth. This dynamic left partners altered, sometimes diminished, while she advanced unchanged. Consumption occurred quietly, without spectacle. What unsettled people most was her refusal to frame love as refuge. She did not seek comfort. She sought expansion. Relationships functioned as catalysts, not shelters. When intensity peaked or purpose shifted, she moved on without resentment. Loyalty belonged to evolution, not to individuals. Charlotte Rampling in the 1970s represented a form of autonomy that lacked warmth yet radiated authority. She neither begged for acceptance nor feared condemnation. Her power lay in detachment, in the ability to observe emotion without surrendering to it. In a decade loud with liberation, she practiced something rarer. Control without apology. Do you see Charlotte Rampling as emotionally distant, or simply more honest than the world was ready to accept? In the next part, passion abandons restraint entirely, as a fragile muse descends into chaos and reinvention. Part 7, Marianne Faithfull. Marianne Faithfull began the decade carrying the residue of aristocratic grace. Her voice, her face, and her early fame placed her among the most luminous muses of her generation. That image did not survive the shift. When her relationship with Mick Jagger ended, the fall was immediate and unforgiving. What followed was not retreat, but unraveling. Separation stripped away protection. Fame remained, but structure vanished. Marianne entered a period of self-destruction that blurred intention and survival. Excess replaced stability. Days and nights dissolved into the same haze. Control slipped quietly, replaced by need. The public watched a transformation that felt both tragic and mesmerizing. Men became lifelines. Not partners in growth, but temporary shelters from withdrawal, fear, and exposure. Each connection offered brief relief, a place to land before the ground gave way again. These relationships were intense and short-lived, fueled by shared damage rather than mutual repair. Love functioned as medication, effective only in small doses. She drifted through Soho and beyond, often without a fixed home. Poverty and visibility existed side by side. Despite decline, her magnetism never faded. Even at her lowest point, she drew people toward her. Fragility sharpened her allure. Pain became part of the aesthetic, impossible to separate from the woman herself. Every relationship altered her. Marianne did not repeat versions of herself. She shed skins continuously, absorbing traits, voices, and attitudes from those around her. Each man represented a different identity experiment, a way to survive another phase. Reinvention was not strategy. It was instinct. As the decade aged, the chaos began to exhaust its own momentum. Her marriage to Ben Brearley arrived as a final attempt at grounding. It offered structure, companionship, and a sense of belonging that had been missing. The bond was imperfect and fragile, but it provided a pause. Not salvation, but space to breathe. Out of that space came Broken English. The album did not romanticize survival. It documented it. The voice was roughened, stripped of innocence, sharpened by experience. It sounded like someone who had endured repeated emotional deaths and refused to disappear. The work reframed her narrative from fallen muse to conscious survivor. Love had played a dual role in her life. It saved her from isolation while pulling her deeper into instability. It provided connection and consequence in equal measure. Marianne never separated affection from danger. She accepted both as inseparable forces shaping her existence. By the end of the decade, she stood transformed. No longer protected by youth or myth, but strengthened by endurance. She had lost illusions and gained authority over her own story. The cost was visible, etched into her voice and posture. What remained was authenticity earned through collapse. Marianne Faithfull did not emerge unscathed. She emerged aware. Her relationships had wounded her, rescued her, and rewritten her repeatedly. In that tension between devotion and destruction, she forged a presence that could not be imitated or erased. Do you think Marianne Faithfull survived because of love, or despite it? In the next part, freedom takes a sharper turn as a woman refuses to apologize for desire and turns experience into power. Part 8, Fiona Richmond. Fiona Richmond stood apart from her contemporaries because she refused secrecy. Where others negotiated desire behind closed doors, she placed it at the center of her public identity. Freedom was not a phase or a rebellion for Fiona. It was a profession, openly claimed and carefully managed. She treated love as field research. Each connection was an encounter to be observed, recorded, and understood. Romance did not promise permanence. It offered information. Men entered her life as collaborators in experience rather than destinations to be reached. Curiosity guided her choices more than attachment. Her partnership with Paul Raymond placed her at the heart of a powerful entertainment empire. The relationship combined influence, wealth, and visibility, yet it did not confine her. Fiona operated with independence inside proximity. She accepted access without surrender. The balance was deliberate. Control mattered more than security. In her world, men were companions for motion. They shared journeys, nights, conversations, and ambitions, then stepped aside when momentum changed. Destiny played no role. Fiona rejected the idea that fulfillment required a singular bond. Variety did not threaten her sense of self. It reinforced it. What distinguished her most was authorship. Fiona shaped her own narrative before others could distort it. She chose how she was seen and what was revealed. When scrutiny arrived, she did not retreat. She clarified. Transparency functioned as armor. By owning the story, she removed its capacity to wound. She refused victimhood entirely. There was no language of seduction gone wrong or innocence lost. Every decision was framed as intentional. That posture unsettled critics because it denied them leverage. Without regret or apology, moral judgment lost traction. Freedom became her survival strategy. In an industry structured to limit women through expectation, Fiona expanded her range by rejecting limitation outright. Desire was not something that happened to her. It was something she directed. That agency allowed her to move through male-dominated spaces without shrinking. Her confidence did not come from denial of risk. She understood consequence. What she refused was shame. By discarding it, she preserved autonomy. Relationships ended without collapse because they were never meant to define her entirely. Identity preceded intimacy, not the other way around. Observers often reduced her to provocation, missing the discipline beneath the surface. Fiona planned, calculated, and adjusted constantly. Pleasure existed alongside pragmatism. Independence required vigilance. She maintained it through clarity of intent and refusal to be cornered into narratives of excess or damage. Fiona Richmond in the 1970s demonstrated a radical idea. A woman could desire openly, choose freely, and remain intact. Freedom was not chaos. It was structure designed on her own terms. Was Fiona Richmond truly liberated, or simply more honest about power than anyone else around her? In the next part, ambition sharpens desire even further, as a woman transforms relationships into currency and control. Part 9, Jackie Collins. Jackie Collins approached romance with the instincts of a collector. Men were not trophies to be displayed, but sources to be studied. She observed habits, vulnerabilities, ambitions, and secrets with precision. Each encounter became material. Experience was never wasted. It was archived. Her marriage operated within openness rather than restriction. Social life unfolded in lavish settings where influence circulated freely. Parties doubled as research environments. Conversations revealed more than intentions. Jackie moved comfortably through these spaces, attentive and strategic, understanding that access produced opportunity. Love, in her hands, transformed into narrative. Desire became plot. Conflict became momentum. Intimacy fed imagination, and imagination generated wealth. She converted lived encounters into fiction that felt intimate because it was rooted in truth. The line between reality and invention blurred, not by accident, but by design. What set Jackie apart was control of authorship. She decided how stories were told and who benefited from them. Others leaked details to tabloids. Jackie published them herself, reframed and elevated. By claiming the role of narrator, she eliminated vulnerability. Exposure no longer threatened her. It empowered her. Ambition outweighed attachment. Relationships were welcome, but never permitted to slow progress. If a partner demanded limitation or loyalty that interfered with momentum, the bond ended cleanly. Jackie did not negotiate with obstruction. Movement remained non-negotiable. Men, within her worldview, were chapters. Each offered a distinct tone, lesson, or conflict. Some were thrilling. Others instructive. None were final. Endings mattered only insofar as they shaped the next phase. Closure existed on the page, not in prolonged emotion. Her social fluency expanded her reach. She understood the currency of proximity and used it deliberately. Writers observed from the margins. Jackie positioned herself at the center. She listened, extracted, and translated. Power moved toward her because she understood its language. Critics accused her of exploitation. She countered by succeeding. Success reframed accusation into curiosity. Sales figures spoke louder than moral objection. What unsettled observers was not her freedom, but her effectiveness. She did not apologize for appetite or authority. Jackie's discipline extended inward. She separated feeling from function without erasing either. Emotion fueled creativity. It did not command decisions. This separation allowed her to maintain clarity while others drowned in drama. Control was not coldness. It was alignment with purpose. By the end of the decade, Jackie Collins had built more than a reputation. She had constructed a system. Relationships fed stories. Stories generated independence. Independence protected autonomy. The cycle sustained itself. Men entered, inspired, and exited, leaving behind value rather than damage. Jackie Collins demonstrated a different kind of freedom. Not escape, not rebellion, but conversion. She turned intimacy into infrastructure and desire into leverage. Her loyalty belonged to creation, not consumption. In a world eager to define women by who they loved, she insisted on being defined by what she built. Did Jackie Collins use love to tell stories, or use stories to master love? In the next part, ambition collapses into vulnerability, as a brilliant actress discovers what happens when identity depends too deeply on one bond. Part 10, Vivian Merchant. Vivian Merchant was defined by intellect and precision. On stage, she commanded language with clarity and restraint. Off stage, her emotional world operated on a single axis. Love was not an accessory to her life. It was the structure holding everything else in place. Her marriage to Harold Pinter became that structure. He was not only her partner, but the center around which identity, purpose, and stability revolved. Their union fused creativity with intimacy. Vivian was muse, collaborator, and emotional anchor. The relationship provided meaning, direction, and validation in equal measure. When that bond fractured, the collapse was total. Pinter's attachment to another woman did not simply end a marriage. It dismantled Vivian's internal architecture. Replacement triggered erasure. The loss was not only of a partner, but of self-definition. Without that central reference, everything blurred. What followed was a series of brief and unstable relationships. These connections were not driven by desire or curiosity. They were attempts at repair. Each Newman offered temporary reassurance, a momentary sense of being seen. None could restore what had been removed. The cycle repeated because the wound remained open. Public attention intensified the damage. Private grief became spectacle. The media framed her distress as drama, reducing complexity to sensation. Headlines replaced empathy. Interviews amplified vulnerability. Pain was consumed as entertainment. Vivian was observed rather than supported, her suffering repackaged for fascination. As control diminished, alcohol entered the frame. It did not arrive as indulgence. It arrived as relief. Drinking softened memory, blurred humiliation, and muted longing. Over time, refuge turned into dependence. The very tool used to escape reality began shaping it. Her professional presence faded alongside stability. Roles diminished. Appearances grew erratic. The woman once celebrated for discipline and nuance became associated with volatility and decline. This shift reinforced isolation. Talent remained, but access narrowed. The industry moved forward without waiting. Those close to her saw a person trapped between brilliance and fragility. Vivian did not lack strength. She lacked separation. Her sense of worth had been bound too tightly to one relationship. When it ended, nothing stood independently. Recovery required foundations she had never built. By the late years of the decade, she moved like a ghost through familiar spaces. The theater world remembered her achievements, but engaged with her absence. She had once been central. Now she was peripheral. The contrast deepened despair rather than inspiring return. Vivian Merchant's story was not one of excess or rebellion. It was a story of devotion without insulation. Love had been her universe. When it vanished, she did not know how to reassemble meaning from fragments. What remained was memory, regret, and endurance without direction. She had been a defining presence of the stage. In the 1970s, she became a symbol of what happens when identity rests entirely on one bond. Intelligence and talent were not enough to protect against collapse. Autonomy, once deferred, never arrived in time. Was Vivian Merchant destroyed by betrayal, or by the belief that love was the only place she belonged? In the next part, the story circles back to the decade itself, revealing what these women collectively exposed about freedom, power, and survival.